The Australian Federal Police have arrested Ben Roberts-Smith and charged him with 5 offences of the war crime of murder. The charges relate to alleged conduct during deployments between 2009 and 2012, and the maximum penalty that Ben Roberts-Smith can receive includes life in prison. Now, I want you to imagine this. You're a prosecutor and you're trying to prove a killing that happened in a remote part of Afghanistan more than a decade ago. It was during the middle of combat, during the middle of war. There's going to be witnesses scattered across countries, different languages, different time zones, and the whole thing is being argued in a Sydney courtroom where half the country has already formed an opinion as to what has happened. That, in a nutshell, is why I believe the Ben Roberts-Smith criminal trial, if it ever reaches a jury, it won't just be a big case, a monumental case in Australian history. It is going to be a ridiculously hard case to prosecute because the problems that everyone's going to face in court are going to be absolutely brutal. Hi, I'm Hayder Shkara, and if you're new here, I'm an Australian lawyer, a director of a team of 40 lawyers across the country. And in this video, I'm going to focus on what I think the problems that are likely to occur during the Ben Roberts-Smith trial. This case has divided the country and everybody has an opinion as to what occurred, and people feel very strongly, very emotionally about the whole situation, which is why the country is now like a matchbox about to be set on fire. All right, so big problem number one. The first big problem I see about this case is time. And that's not how long this whole thing is going to take, but like in every case, time attacks a trial in 3 different directions. Now, the longer the time has been since the alleged incident has occurred to when it appears in trial, you start having 3 main problems when it comes to time. The first is you're not able to get any actual physical evidence. The second is you then have to start relying on witness testimonies, and witness testimonies start to fade because memories don't last 10 years, 15 years. And once you get pressed in court, those memories start to fade away and it becomes harder and harder to actually rely on these witness testimonies. And the third thing is a lead on from that, which is how do you gather all of those witnesses from things that occurred 15 years ago to a courtroom now, especially when you've got a situation in Afghanistan. Like, it's not really the easiest country to go and obtain witnesses from and track people down and see where they were living. And you've also got all these problems as to the government over there and how their witness testimonies could be influenced by that. You need to remember these alleged events, they occurred from 2009 to 2012, and we are now in 2026. So even in a normal, ordinary murder case that occurred in this country where we had access to forensics, access to physical evidence, access to reports from police officers that were on the scene at the time, all of that becomes non-existent in this situation, because in a normal situation, if it was in the suburbs of Sydney, you'd have a whole team that goes in, they collect all of the DNA, they collect samples, they see if there's any bullets that have been left over, they run ballistics. They're trying to do everything possible to retain as much evidence as you can. But all of this occurred in a combat environment overseas years ago. So to think we're going to go back to the crime scene and obtain evidence there is no possibility of that. You don't have the legal authority to even go that. The crime scene is going to obviously be completely tainted. So this case is going to rely heavily on witness testimony. And if there is going to be a reliance on witness testimony, you start going into the question of credibility, because there's such public interest around this case. And we know that a lot of the witnesses are people that actually served with Ben Roberts-Smith. So there's going to be a lot of pressure when it comes to reputation of themselves, reputation of the whole SAS unit, of the Australian government. So with all of this pressure, you're going to have all of these concerns about credibility and the validity of these witness testimonies, because how do we know that we don't have a situation where all of these people have pressure on them? I'm not saying they're lying, but they might be tainting an evidence in a particular way or swaying it in a particular direction, using particular language which is trying to paint a story. The next big problem I see with this case is how the court's going to balance national security interests and what's occurring in open court for the sake of public interest. And so normally these types of proceedings, they should be done in open court because there's a concept of natural justice and there's a concept of things being done openly and transparently in front of the public. But if we have situations where there are national security concerns, then there's going to be arguments whether or not particular evidence can be allowed in. There's going to be a lot of closed door sessions about sensitive material and whether this can be actually displayed in front of the public. There's going to be a lot of sessions about what documents need to be redacted because it can't be released to the public. And there's also going to be arguments about immunity claims. And this is where war crime prosecutions become so unique and so delicate, because the state has interests that are competing with one another. How do you balance protecting national security interests and running a trial that is in a proper and fair manner? And if a judge thinks that they need to get involved in order to protect a particular interest, they can make orders that reshape the entire trial. They can include particular pieces of evidence or they can exclude it. And you know, that is really what is going to swing a jury in these situations. Now, I just want to take a quick detour here because we've also got the whole defamation case, which has run before. I know that I was following that closely. That's almost started 10 years ago now. And so since 2018, these proceedings have been in front of the public eye, and Ben Roberts-Smith and the whole case has been run through the federal court, but to a civil standard. Nevertheless, the whole media circus, the whole Australian public have already kind of seen this story, and they've also already formed a view as to whether Ben Roberts-Smith is guilty of doing these things or not doing these things. So the next concern that I have is whether the jury is already going to have pre-trial prejudice and whether their opinions are going to be contaminated by all of the information that's been in Australian media over the last 7 years. And I think with that pre-trial prejudice, we're going into the next problem, which is the potential of getting a hung jury. And nobody wants that. It's like getting a draw in the FIFA World Cup final. There isn't going to be a result going one way or another. There isn't a verdict. It's just that the whole procedure needs to go again if the jury isn't able to come to a unanimous decision as to whether or not Ben Roberts-Smith is guilty or not guilty. And I think that is a huge risk as to what's going to happen here, because how are you going to find a set of jurors that are going to be able to be on the same page here after they've already been listening to this case for the last 8-9 years? And I think one thing's for sure, people are really concerned about the amount of funds that have been spent on this case already. And so the last thing the public wants is to have all of this drawn out in a trial for that to then disappear and for it to happen again in a retrial because the jury has been hung. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a case that is very historically significant. It's legally complex. And if you want my prediction, the biggest stories over the next stretch are going to be about procedural decisions. And a large part of that is what evidence gets in and what evidence is going to be excluded. So if you've got any questions or you want me to cover something else on the Ben Roberts-Smith trial, feel free to leave comments below. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.